Good evening, Dr. Twyman here. Tonight we're going to be chatting about heart rate variability, or HRV. So this is a topic that can let you know essentially how much stress your body's sensing at that time. So we'll go a little bit into the science, but mostly talk about how do you actually measure it and why it's important to you. So we'll give a few minutes for people to log on here, but while we're waiting, we'll kind of at least explain what heart rate variability is. So the heart rate variability is basically the measurement and the variability measured in milliseconds between each heartbeat. So, give you a little bit of a backstory. This is what it would look like if you were measuring it on an EKG, where the QRS complexes, this is the R-to-R interval, it's variable timing. So it's not like a metronome where the distance and the milliseconds is the same beat to beat. That difference is very important to measure essentially how stressed your body's at that one moment. So, let's go through a little story. Where does that actual measurement come from? Well, it comes from the heart. The heart is not only a pump, it's an electrical system. So in the top chamber in the right atrium, there's the sinus node. The sinus node is the body's master pacemaker. Normally the heart rate is between 60 and 100 beats per minute. So if you've ever had an EKG, that's what they're measuring, or if you measure your pulse, that's what the sinus node is supposed to be doing. Top chamber sends a message down to the bottom chamber. But where does that electricity come from? Honestly, even through all my training, I never really thought about it, but it actually comes from the mitochondria. So, your heart approximately by weight is 1/3 mitochondria. So the mitochondria, take the information and energy and transform it into water, carbon dioxide, heat, and ATP. So while it's doing that, there's an electrical field, and 90 degrees to electric field, there's a magnetic field. So if you put little stickers on your chest, you can measure that electrical field coming off the mitochondria in the heart. So there you go, a little fun fact. But the way you measure heart rate variability, you actually have to have something like an EKG where you can actually measure that. That would be the R-to-R interval. So again, on an EKG, not expecting you guys to know how to read all this tonight, but the little P wave here, that's when the sinus node fires or depolarizes. The big thin line here, the QRS complex, that's when the ventricle, the bottom chamber, fires off electrically. And the T wave is when the bottom chamber relaxes. So you're measuring between the bottom chambers firing is the R-to-R interval. So with different devices, you can measure that change in distance. So it's not something you can just measure by measuring your pulse. You have to have some type of device that measures it. And the classic one would be having a chest strap that measures the EKG. There are other devices which I'll bring out, show and tell in just a minute what I've used in the past. We'll talk about why it's important. So when was it first discovered? Well, back in 1847, Dr. Ludwig and animals, I believe it was dogs, he was the first one to realize that as somebody breathed in, the heart rate would increase, and when they breathed out, the heart rate went down. He didn't understand why at that point, but essentially that breathing in stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system, stimulates the vagal tone, and you slow that heart rate down. So back to that sinus node, it's got wires, not really, but wires from the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system coming into it. And you're always sensing the environment. So it's kind of like gas and brake. You're figuring out how fast to respond to the environment. The sympathetic nervous system is one arm of the autonomic nervous system, and then the parasympathetic nervous system. So the sympathetic is that fight or flight response. So tiger's chasing you, you need your pupils to dilate, you need your heart rate to pick up, you need to dump glucose to your muscles, and you need to run. And the sympathetic nervous system is your kind of acute survival mechanism, acute stress mechanism. But you need that to shut off for the rest and relaxation, the parasympathetic to kick in and to repair any damage that's gone throughout the day. So, acute stress, not a problem. Chronic stress can be a problem. So heart rate variability is a good metric of how much chronic stress your body's sensing at that time. But it was back in 1965 that they discovered that heart rate variability abnormalities went along with fetal distress. So it was in that literature that they realized when the heart rate variability was getting diminished, they basically had to induce the person and get the baby out as soon as possible. In the 70s and 80s, it was mostly into the cardiac literature, and that's obviously where my background is. I'm a board-certified cardiologist. But they were measuring heart rate variability in patients who had suffered myocardial infarctions or heart attacks in the hospital. And so usually when you show up at the hospital with any type of cardiac complaint, they put you on telemetry and they're watching your heart rhythm 24 hours a day. Well, they would monitor these patients, and the patients who had worse heart rate variability, they did worse after a heart attack. They died more often. They had more sudden cardiac death. They were the people that end up with bad heart failure if they did die from sudden cardiac death. So heart rate variability in an acute situation was a good metric of who was going to survive and who wasn't. So it's just a good marker of resilience. And so, I knew that data from my cardiovascular training, but I also knew it from, the athletic world. So heart rate variability is measured by a lot of athletes as a good metric of how much stress their body's been under during that most recent exercise routine, and if they fully recovered from it so that they can go back and crush it again the next day. Where I got more interested in it recently was the, as I'll just grab one of the devices now, the Oura ring, O-U-R-A. They were doing a trial back, I believe, in mid-2019 with the NBA. Had a lot of these players wearing this. And heart rate variability is a good metric of, is your body getting sick with anything? And obviously there's lots of viruses going around now. And your heart rate variability may change 1 to 2 days before you come down with any classic symptoms. Coughing, fevers, not feeling well. Your heart rate variability would compress. So if you saw your heart rate variability compressing and your temperature and your resting heart rate at night going up, you may be getting sick. You want to start monitoring for that. So that's why I started using it a little bit more and monitoring over the past couple of months. I wasn't really using it so much for sleep. I've really been a biohacker since 2017 and got my sleep really dialed in. Obviously circadian rhythm management is one of my expertises. So it wasn't monitoring my sleep so much with the heart rate, with the Oura ring. It's more measuring the heart rate variability. Then, and I'm going to get the question later, what is a good heart rate variability? There's multiple different ways to measure it. It's, the rough estimate is it's measured in milliseconds, and in all comers, it's between 20 and 200 milliseconds would be quote normal. But there's all sorts of interesting mathematical ways you can then, let's say, massage the data and get a more common number that you can then compare apples to oranges at times. So that's kind of what I want to talk about the background. And then, go through a few things, what could actually influence heart rate variability. And it's numerous, and this is a list that's not all inclusive. So your current status of aerobic fitness. So if you're a very fit individual, all things considered, you should have a better resting heart rate variability. Your age, as you age, your heart rate tends to increase as you age, which it's inversely correlated. As your heart rate increases, your heart rate variability goes down. Basically, genes. Certain people have genes that have an effect on how fast you can get rid of cortisol, adrenaline. You have a COMT, SNP gene that may have an abnormality. So genetics can play a role. There's also certain genes that have an effect on how big your left ventricle is. So, if you have a bigger left ventricle, maybe you can get away with a slower heart rate because it's heart rate times stroke volume is your cardiac output. Body position. So we'll talk about it. Generally, you should be lying flat for most instances of measuring it, because if you're standing up, that raises your heart rate and it's going to compress your heart rate variability. But if you always measure it standing up, then that's going to be generally okay. Time of day definitely has a circadian aspect of it, even a seasonal aspect. So again, there's no normal heart rate variability. It's what's the normal heart rate variability for you. Your health status. So again, like I said, if you're coming out with a virus or something, your heart rate variability is going to compress. Or if you're somebody who's already got a bad heart, you have a cardiomyopathy, you have diabetic neuropathy, weak mitochondria to begin with, you're probably going to have lower heart rate variability. And then some of the environmental things, temperature, humidity, altitude, the room that you're in. So if you're sleeping in a really hot room, you're probably going to have worse heart rate variability than if it's a real cool room. Certain drugs, beta blockers tend to compress it. Angiotensin receptor blockers tend to increase it. And then hormonal status, I talked about a little bit about that, your cortisol, your adrenaline levels all have an effect on this. And then the things that, you have a little bit more control over is, what goes into your system. So, the timing of your meals. If you're eating through late, that's going to raise your metabolic rate into going to bedtime. So higher temperatures tend to raise your heart rate, and then that's going to lower your heart rate variability. The stimulants, caffeine, nicotine, definitely going to crush your heart rate variability. So, generally you're going to want to check first thing in the morning time before you have any of those stimulants in your system. And the big one for many people is alcohol. So, especially alcohol, within a couple hours of bedtime. The alcohol is really going to change your sleep architecture and raise your temperature, and it's going to have an effect on your heart rate variability. I saw one trial that showed that just 2 drinks at night will probably crush your heart rate variability by 33%, and maybe for a couple of days. So, not telling you to be a teetotaler, but be mindful if you're not sleeping well, or you haven't recovered from a workout, or you're about to get sick. Alcohol is not your friend at nighttime because it's crushing your heart rate variability. And again, the heart rate variability is just a metric. It's like your check engine light. What is your body doing at that time? How is it sensing the environment? So you have all these stressors coming into your system. Stress isn't either necessarily good or bad, but just how does your body respond to it? So if you have a quick stress, the tiger chased you, you ran away, you got free. How fast do you get back down to normal? If you're always in that fight or flight response for 24 hours afterwards, you're basically wearing your body out faster than it should. Why don't we go through how do you measure it generally? There's different ways to measure it, but probably a best way for most beginners would be to do a measurement first thing in the morning before getting out of bed, taking it in a recumbent position. So, the variables should be all the same. So, you've not hydrated, you've not gotten up, you've not drank coffee, so lie flat. There's different devices, that measure it. I already showed you the Oura Ring. The Oura Ring basically measures your continuous heart rate variability overnight in 5-minute increments and gives you a number in the morning time, gives you your average heart rate variability, your peak, and then kind of shows you the trend. That's a good way to look at it. How I initially started out was using a piece of software called Elite HRV. Eventually I bought their little monitor called the Core Sense. Looks like a pulse ox. Put your finger in it in the morning time and does a 3-minute heart rate variability, and then gives you a number after it's done. Also played around with the Whoop band. Not currently playing around with it for nighttime use. Sometimes I'll still use it when I'm working out just to get my zone 2 heart rate targets optimized. But then again, probably should say, there's nights I would wear both, always in Bluetooth off mode, because you're going to be pinging yourself with a bunch of radio signals while you're sleeping. But I'd wear the Oura Ring and the Whoop band. I can tell you the heart rate variabilities were nowhere near each other. They never correlated. So pick a device and just stick to the device. But measuring that heart rate variability in the morning, get a good 3 to 5 days, and then kind of get your baseline. And again, there's no perfect heart rate variability. It's what is your average, and what did you do the day before that might have broke it, or did you recover enough that you got back to your normal average? So wanted to kind of hit upon how the best way to take it. First thing in the morning, lying down, 3 to 5 minute measurement. There are different numbers that these software platforms will pump out. Most of them are going to give you a kind of a 1 number, but there's multiple different ways that you can measure heart rate variability. Probably the best one would be, it's long, it's an RMSSD, stands for the square root of the mean squared difference of successive RR intervals. Again, a mouthful. It's a mathematical formulation where they're taking the RR intervals, they're measuring that distance in milliseconds, and then they're square rooting the mean of it and pumping out a number. That kind of will tell you essentially how much parasympathetic influence is affecting the sinus node. So that's one of the time domain ways to measure it. There's also frequency domains. Those are typically 5-minute measurements where they'll measure your low frequency and high frequency. So the lower frequencies are mostly sympathetic, I should say are sympathetically dominated, so it's 0.04 to 0.15 hertz. And then the parasympathetic nervous impulses are generally 0.15 to 0.4 hertz, so they can measure the frequency intensities and then give you a ratio. So if your body's under increased stress, you're going to tend to have a increased low frequency to high frequency ratio. So you can measure that with some of the at-home devices. If you see me in the office at Apollo Cardiology, we have a device called the Max Pulse. It gives you a 3-minute heart rate variability scan while you're doing it, but also gives you the frequency domains. So you can see that there's different little graphs that show you the low frequency, high frequency, total frequency. But you can see today, this was mine this morning, just wanted to have a diagram of it, but the sympathetic tone is much higher than the parasympathetic tone. This test was not done in a fasting state, wasn't done in a non-caffeinated state, so not surprised that the Heart rate variability was not optimal at that point, but my general heart rate variability has been pretty steady over the past few days. Personally, I don't have a very, quote, high heart rate variability, but I'm not sick, I'm not overtrained, I sleep well, I'm not drinking anything that's really crushing my heart rate variability right now. So, just find out what your baseline is and measure you against you. So, did want to leave you off with a few things you can do to try to improve your heart rate variability. So, test, don't guess. I learned that from my mentor. So, have a device where you can actually measure heart rate variability. And then, keep a log of, what were you eating, what were you drinking, what was your mood like, what was your exercise routine like. And then, if all of a sudden you see your levels staying low for periods of time, use your logbook to figure out what is breaking your heart rate variability and try to remove it if you can. If you can't absolutely figure it out, well, then you just throw the kitchen sink at things. Focus on sleep. That's probably one of the biggest things that's going to improve heart rate variability. So, if you're getting enough deep sleep and REM sleep, the heart rate variability will improve. Deep breathing exercises can help. So, box breaths. This goes into why yoga is very beneficial. Meditation is very beneficial. You're stimulating the vagus nerve with those deep breaths. Exercise, is a stressor to your system, you recover. And so then you have a higher baseline over time. So, there are times, you can overtrain. If you run for a marathon, you potentially can overtrain at some point, and your heart rate variability is going to be crushed. You got to, sleep, not run so hard, and let that heart rate variability recover. But the more exercise you do over time, you can have a higher and higher baseline. Hydration is very important. If you're dehydrated, heart rate variability is going to be depressed. I suspect it's probably due to the exclusion zone in your blood vessels having an effect, and the flow of the blood slows down. Alcohol, definitely want to avoid alcohol if your heart rate variability is getting crushed and there's other stressors on your system that's pushing it down. But or push alcohol earlier in the evening time, further from night time that you go to sleep. Green leafy vegetables have been shown to improve it. I would suspect it'd be through the nitrates, which ultimately turn into nitric oxide. Gratitude. So, what are you thankful for? Journaling has been shown to improve heart rate variability. I can never pronounce it right, but it's a Shinrin Yuko, or essentially nature bathing, forest bathing, very popular in Japan. But being outside in nature, especially a bunch of green trees, really been shown to kind of decrease your fight or flight response. Rest relaxation improves, heart rate variability improves. And then I've never tried it, but I've had some patients use it. But weighted blankets can also have an effect with improving heart rate variability. So that's what I want to share with you guys tonight is, what is heart rate variability? Refresher, it's just the measurement in milliseconds between successive heartbeats. And as you breathe in and out, that's going to kind of expand and contract. So as you breathe in, you have an increase in your heart rate, and heart rate variability goes down. And when you breathe out, the heart rate slows down, improvement in heart rate variability. How to influence it, we went through that tonight, how to measure it. A couple things that didn't hit yet that are more interesting on how to potentially improve it. I played around with this a little bit. This is the Apollo Neuro device that goes around your ankle and has these different gyroscopes in them that cause a vibration at different intensities, and has been shown to improve heart rate variability. It's interesting, sometimes the alertness one does sort of feel like you were caffeinated. I've just been playing around with it. I haven't quite figured out all the settings yet to see if it would have an effect on sleep in a different way, or would you really recover faster from an exercise routine? Don't know yet, but interesting device you can use. And the other thing that I like to recommend patients consider is using something like HeartMath from, it's the HeartMath Institute. They have a device called the Inner Balance. It's a little clip that goes onto your ear and measures your pulse in your ear. And you clip it into your phone, and it gives you your heart rate variability and basically puts you through different guided breathing exercises so that you basically get your heart and your brain to talk appropriately. And when those things are in coherence, your heart rate variability improves. So it gives you that biofeedback that you're doing the right breathing exercises and stimulating the heart rate variability in a proper way. So that's what I want to share with you guys tonight. Drop in the comments, if you have questions about this. I'll post some of the pictures of what these devices are in my feed in just a little bit. Next week, Monday, 6 p.m., topic to be determined, but I'm going to stick to a cardiovascular topic at this point. This Friday, I'm going to be doing a webinar for any interested individuals I'm going to be launching a membership program at Apollo Cardiology in February 2022. The membership program is going to include heart rate variability and teaching how to use it effectively. If you want me to monitor your heart rate variability, I'll tell you what devices to get, and then we'll find a way that you can get your information to me. But I'm basically designing a very comprehensive heart attack prevention program. I've talked about a lot of these devices in the past: CIMTs, max pulses, ACCOR, calcium scores, endopats, all the non-invasive tests that really tell you how healthy your arteries are. I frequently share that I've had a great-grandmother make it to 106 years old. I call it Mission 106 Plus. I'm trying to beat her record. And so in order to do that, you can't die early from a heart attack. So test, don't guess. How healthy are your arteries? So if you are interested in learning more about the program Heart Attack Proof, just send me a direct message and put the word Heart Attack Proof in it, and I'll get you a message about the webinar this upcoming Friday that I'll be having on Zoom. So appreciate you guys' attention tonight, and we'll see you guys next week.